Good morning. Thank you, Niels. I'm delighted and honored to be here in Stockholm as a guest of the Radio Institute. I'm going to begin with a question. My question is a question to you, and the question is this. Are free markets bad? Or, at the very least, are free markets morally worrying? Many people think so. If their societies embark upon market-based reforms, say in the delivery of schooling, care for the elderly, for the sick, and for the unemployed, they may feel in some way that their societies have been morally compromised. And if, as a matter of historical fact, their societies were forced to adopt those reforms, say, looking down the barrel of an economic gun, they may feel that sense of betrayal or of moral compromise even more acutely. I know that many people in my country, the United States, feel that way. And I suspect that many people in other countries, including Sweden, may feel something like that too. Now, I'm aware that it may seem very strange for me, an American, to deliver a lecture to you, citizens of Sweden, about the nature and moral requirements of social justice. Everyone knows that you Swedes know a lot and care a lot about social justice, and we Americans, well, it's just not so clear. So please forgive me, because giving you a lecture, delivering a lecture to you on social justice is exactly what I have come here to do. I have an idea that I wish to share with you. That idea is this. The growth in our understanding about the moral requirements of social justice has not kept pace with the growth in our understanding about the economic contradictions of socialism and indeed of old school social democracy as well. So I'm going to talk about that growth that we need and understanding about the nature and requirements of social justice. I believe that anyone who, like me, is committed to social justice has some moral growing up to do. It's not easy to grow up, and it's especially not easy to grow up, morally speaking, but I think we need to. Indeed, I believe that anyone who cares about social justice and is facing these facts now faces a choice. We can cling to our inherited moral ideas about social justice and what it means, and feel outraged or at least vaguely sad as the world changes around us. Or we can stop. We can think anew for ourselves about an exciting new possibility. And that possibility is this. The market-based reforms in our societies, perhaps, signal not the death or even the wounding of social justice, but instead, those reforms may be the first stirrings of that idea of social justice's higher fulfillment. Now, my background's in philosophy. I'm a philosopher, and I'm about to roll some philosophy on you. I'm aware that it's morning, and no one likes to have philosophy rolled on them, even in the evening. I promise that I'll roll it on you in a way that will not be painful. At least it will not be painful unless you walked into the room this morning having a political philosophy. And if you had a philosophy and find what I'm about to say painful, don't be alarmed. What is pain? Pain is only weakness leaving the body. So for many years, 40 years, 50 years maybe, possibly longer, the terrain of political theorizing, the world in which I do my academic work, has lain in a deep freeze. There's a divide among philosophers, an ideological divide among philosophers, which is mirrored in a divide among the popular politics of many countries, most notably the US, but other places as well. As I think of the divide among academics, the divide between these two camps, these two ideological camps, is like a frozen cove with ice and wind blowing wisps of snow across this divide between the two camps. Off one coast, on one side, we have on the academic side at least, the academically embattled camp of what I'll call libertarians, or if you like, classical liberals. These are people who I imagine them in the academy. I have long been one of them. I began as one of them, I have to admit. These are the people I imagine them hunkered down in the tents, on the ice, the wind blowing against the doors, but they have these moral stakes that uphold their tents firmly in place. They defend limited government, strictly limited government, strong economic liberties, property rights, and in their camp, the phrase social justice, it's a phrase never or only dismissively heard. If they mention the term social justice in that camp, they do so only to say why it's a bad idea and should be rejected. This is the camp, the philosophical camp, that gives firepower to popular movements such as the American Tea Party, for example. On the other side of the frozen divide, far away across that expanse, that windswept expanse, is the academically dominant camp, the camp of the Democrats or the Social Democrats, or some people call them the high liberals, though I know liberal means something different to you than it does to me. Liberals have always been to my left, probably not the same for you. This is the camp. This is the camp of people who, it's a luxurious camp within the academy. Most academics are social democrats or left, from the left in some way or the other. This is a camp whose main structures are not tents, but rather very solidly built igloos, typically blocked together by a very powerful philosopher from the 1970s named John Rawls. And I imagine that people in this camp sitting, not with the wind blowing against the doors, but in fact sitting in their igloos with heaters, with furs, no doubt probably faux furs, and they are very comfortable by comparison in that camp. Their battle cry in that camp is social justice. And they advocate a government of expansive powers, especially in economic issues. They're highly skeptical of private economic liberties. And they're very skeptical of marketizing reforms that have happened in many countries over the last 20 or 30 years. This is the group that I suppose, in some forms, gives intellectual firepower to popular movements such as Occupy Wall Street. I'm not sure people occupied Stockholm, but they did occupy Wall Street. What's important, and now here's the philosophy starting. What's important, though, I think, is that the debate between the schools over here that I just described, the libertarian school and the social democratic one, which is a debate, as I said, between political viewpoints, one saying that economic liberty is the most important political norm, the other saying that social justice is the most important political norm. That political dispute is, in fact, rooted in a very complicated and difficult philosophical dispute. It's a dispute, this dispute about politics, is actually rooted in an idea, a prior dispute, often unseen by most people, about the nature of moral personality, that where we should start in thinking about the nature of a person to do politics at all. Philosophers typically get to their political conclusions only by way of a prior conversation about how we should think about what we really are, what kind of beings we really are. And they think that if we talk about the kind of creatures that we are and have some correct moral account of how we are in the world morally as citizens or as people, once we have that, then we can decide, second, what the state should look like. Because the state's going to be for people. So we have to know what a person is before we can decide what the state should look like. But the difficulty, as I'll explain now, is that these two schools that I mentioned, these two camps across the divide, each is committed to a fundamentally different and irreconcilable conception of the person. So first, the libertarians. By libertarians, it's a very broad school. Historically, I suppose it's rooted in the work of John Locke. More recent libertarians include Robert Nozick, Ayn Rand, who of Atlas Shrugged fame is a libertarian. And libertarians argue that when we think about a person, when we think about how we should begin politics, we should imagine what we're like in the state of nature. We should imagine what we would be like if there were no state at all. And they look at what kind of beings are we? And one thing they say, following John Locke, is that we are, in our essence, we know this, at least this about ourselves, each of us owns ourselves. if I own myself, even with no state at all, before there's a state, if I own myself, then I also own my labor. And if I own my labor, then if I mix my labor with things in the world, by gathering acorns or apples, by pruning trees, by tilling the land, then I can come to own those things too. So on this view, ownership of property is built into the very structure of the universe. And indeed, on Locke's account, Locke said that God created all of us and created nature too. God chose to create us as beings that have mouths and stomachs that become hungry. He chose to create the world so that trees will grow apples that happen to go into our mouths and satisfy our hunger. It could have been different, Locke would have said. He didn't say it this way, but we could have been born and created as billiard balls, we human beings, with no needs for the external world. But in fact, we were created in such a way there's a fit between us, the kind of beings that we are, and the nature of the world out there, such that property rights, the idea of individual ownership of things in the world, is built into the very fabric of the universe. And if you think that that's what a person is like, if that's a correct moral account of the person, then you see, arguing sort of naturalistically, as I've just been doing, about our very nature, that the state, one of the most important things the state should do, is to protect those God-given natural facts about us. So in this tradition of libertarianism, the idea that people are self-owners is a morally important fact that should be respected when it comes to talking about politics. And so what should the state do? Well, insofar as the state should do anything at all, it should protect private property rights. And so that's the view that gets us the idea of the minimal state and such skepticism about social justice. By contrast, across that windswept divide are the social democrats, or what I call left liberals. They begin differently. Their intellectual forebears, I suppose, are not, it's not John Locke, but someone, maybe Rousseau. And contemporary social democrats, a very famous one, as I mentioned before, is the philosopher John Rawls. And social democrats say, look, how should we think about ourselves for purposes of politics? Not as a self-owner in the woods. Rather, they say, well, what could we be living together? And they say politics should begin with a discussion about what moral capacities we have as citizens. What does it mean to be a citizen? And on this approach, Rousseau in particular, but other people as well, Mill had some of this, John Maynard Keynes has some too as well. There are two powers, I say two P's, two moral powers, two capacities that characterize citizens. One, each one of us has a life to lead, a life of our own. And that life is intensely important to each one of us. We know we have a life, it's ours, and it really matters to each of us how our lives go. But so too, having a life to lead that's important to us, each of us has the capacity to recognize that each of our fellow citizens, even people we don't know, people in this room, that each of you has a life to lead too, just as I do, and that your life is fantastically important to you. So on this approach to politics, we begin with those general ideas about people, that they have these two powers to recognize themselves as having a life that's important and to recognize that their fellow citizens have lives that are important too. And then when you start doing politics, you start reasoning out democratically, talking with each other about what kinds of social structure would be appropriate for beings such as us. They say that one of the most important things of a just society is that goods be distributed in such a way that no one's left behind, that the importance of every person's life is respected and honored. And so they generate an extremely important idea of social justice, and developed in the 20th century at least, we're very skeptical of economic liberty. I'm interested in changing that structure. The crucial point of that structure is that the debates about politics get mired in debates about moral personality, and they cannot be reconciled. And what I do, and a group of us are trying to do, is change the debate around. And briefly, what I do is, I'm a person who's extremely taken with the importance of economic liberty. The idea that people are self-authors, authors of their own lives, I think is intimately connected with the things we do in the economic realm. The choices we make about saving, about spending, about the kind of work we do, and the number of hours we work, the conditions under which we work, are an extremely important part about the life plans that people have. But with those insights about economic liberty, I move down here and I accept the same idea of the democratic citizen. And then, as a classical libertarian, who now accepts this idea of the citizen, I think, well, what does it mean to have these two moral powers? And I think you can argue from this idea out to something like a new conception of social justice, one which is founded squarely on the idea of the democratic citizen and rejects and leaves behind my old friends in that windswept camp about self-ownership, absolutely leave that behind, and now begin a new serious conversation about how we really best respect each other. And the idea is that you can combine economic liberty and social justice, and what you get is this idea, and this is the most important idea I want to share with you. When people think about social justice, we think about the theories of social justice that were handed down to us and developed in the 20th century. I think what we actually received from the 20th century is one interpretation of social justice, an interpretation that I call social democratic. But I think there is available to us, philosophically speaking, conceptually speaking, and morally speaking, an alternative, different way of thinking about social justice. One founded on the idea of democratic citizenship, one committed to respecting the importance of everyone's life to themselves and of our fellow citizens, but it emphasizes instead what I call market democratic values. And a market democratic conception of social justice has two important features. First, unlike the old 20th century social democratic conceptions, the market democratic conceptions take very seriously the importance of private economic liberty. This idea, this new idea, says that when we talk about people having their own lives to lead, and when we talk about the respect we owe to our fellow citizens when they're trying to lead their lives, some of the old social democratic policies, however well-intentioned, can be in fact morally bullying. That when we try to do things well for people, we have to be very careful that we not engage in economic paternalism and make them do things that they don't themselves want to do. A lot of my work is influenced by feminism. I'm really struck by the insight of 19th century feminist people like Andrew Gibson in A Doll's House, the idea that for women, being given all the gilded material things in the world, but being denied basic liberties, including economic liberties, was a kind of oppression. And my thought is that something similar, that feminist critique of patriarchy, strangely enough, can be turned and applied against orthodox conceptions of social democracy. That even well-intended provision of social services, and even when it works out well, in occasions when it does, may nonetheless carry a moral twinge of paternalism, of not allowing and respecting people to be responsible authors of their own lives. So in my book, Free Market Fairness, I try to develop a complete account of market democracy, and my main idea is that market democracy is a new approach to social justice. It can be developed in new ways. I think it's probably the kind of view that can be developed differently from different cultures in different societies. The Swedish version of market democracy and an American version might be very different depending on our cultural norms and other differences among us. But still, there is something, as people tell me, sort of American about the idea of market democracy. I call my view free market fairness. Some people call it another thing that I'll just leave you with. Some people call it social justice, American style. And I'll stop with that. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you very, very much, John. This was philosophical high ground to many of us, I think, but you succeeded very well to explain this in a simpler way. We have opportunity to take a couple of questions. And while we're thinking about that, what I find very attractive about this perspective is that it's an inclusive definition. As we say in Swedish, alla ska vara med. That's the basic idea in this framework. Could you expand that a little bit? How should we look on our institutions and laws and so on from this perspective? That we should regard our institutions as legitimate.
Yes. One idea from the democratic tradition is that a set of social institutions is legitimate only if every person in the society can accept those institutions. So a political society has to be structured in such a way that it generally respects all the people in society. But then the question is, well, what does it mean to respect people? In an era of early industrial capitalism, when citizens were confronting huge machinery of capitalism, it may have been the case that to show respect for our vulnerable citizens, it was important to have laws that protected them against those threats from the economy. But as the economy changes, and as societies grow steadily wealthier, the threats and the opportunities may start to change. And one of the really striking developments in the last 100 years is that Western societies, despite our increasing inequality in many dimensions, have nonetheless grown much wealthier. That fact of changing wealth, I think, may upset traditional conceptions of social justice, and it may also offer new opportunities for developing new accounts that give greater importance to self-authorship in the realm of economic decision-making.
Mm-hmm. Did we have any questions? Sorry? Okay, please present yourself.
Matthias Svensson from Neo magazine. I was wondering, you propose economic liberty and social justice, yes. But you land in something looking very similar to economic liberty and social liberty. Why is not that the point? And isn't that more close to your actual position, even if that means discarding roles?
No. No, I emphasized economic liberty because when we compare these two approaches to social justice, it's the failure of the social democratic view to take economic liberty seriously enough, and the insistence among market Democrats, the small band of us so far, to take that. That's the important difference. However, I really wish to emphasize, when you move to the democratic conception of the citizen, as I suggest that people from the right should do, morally they should do, you are committed to social justice. It's a full-scale commitment to the idea that our society is only legitimate if our institutions are arranged in such a way that they leave no one behind. So to have a strong safety net is an extremely important part of a just society. Market democracy, free market fairness is strongly committed to the idea that no person through sickness or age or unemployment should be left behind. But it also says that the truly just society is one which consistently works to get everyone working, to get every person a responsible self-author of their own lives in the economic realm, and that a good society is not a society where many people enjoy the benefits of the welfare state. The best society, the morally highest society, is a society where we're absolutely committed to seeing all our citizens standing on their own, together, as independent agents, respecting one another, especially in the economic realm. So there's a different conception of social justice. I think free markets are a kind of fairness, provided the benefits of markets and the experience of market society is available to everyone, or made available to every citizen.
I think we will have you back in the panel discussions later on, but we'll end this with a big hand, I think.